righty. All right, so welcome everyone, and good evening. I hope everybody's doing well, and we are going to take a look at Parshas Pinchas this week, which, of course, like all Parshas, is very interesting, very exciting. There's a lot to it, so we don't want to waste any time, so we'll jump right in. And Parshas Pinchas really is a continuation. Y'all. It's a continuation of last week's Parsha, which we didn't really talk about the end of last week's Parsha, because we got caught up with the whole story of Bilam and Balak. But we know that after this whole fiasco where Bilam, this sorcerer, this wicked sorcerer, tried 3 times and failed to curse the Jewish people. And every time he attempted to curse the Jewish people, Hashem put a blessing in his mouth. So he actually ended up blessing the Jewish people. The whole purpose of him being hired was so he could curse them, knock them down from their holy level, which would allow them to be could be attacked by the Moabites, which was why the Moabite king hired this sorcerer, but it failed. So finally, in this sort of last-ditch effort to make some inroads into the holiness and the sanctity of the Jewish people, Bilam came up with a new plan, and he advised the Moabites and the Moabite king to send in a group of women to seduce the Jewish people, to seduce them. And Moabite women that could seduce them into immorality, sexual immorality, and ultimately into idolatry. Because Hashem despises, if there's 2 things Hashem despises, it's sexual immorality and idolatry. So the plan was send in these women to seduce them. And before they can have the opportunity to be with these women, they would have to agree to serve the idol Baal. That was the name of the idol. And that was the plan. And guess what? Kind of worked. So the Moabite women went in a very seductive way, led by a Midianite princess, to seduce the Jewish men. And they, unfortunately, Jewish men took the bait, and the plague, a terrible, terrible plague began, and that plague continued. And we found out last week that an Israelite man, and last week he was unnamed. It was not disclosed who this Israelite man was, just that there was an Israelite man who took a Midianite woman, and her identity was also undisclosed. And he brought her in to the tent where Moshe was and where everyone was gathered, and he publicly consorted with this Midianite woman in a very, very public desecration of Hashem's name. Okay, and then we find out that Pinchas, who was the son, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, Pinchas, who was the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen, took matters into his own hands. In a very extreme act, he took a sword and he jabbed the sword right through these 2 individuals in the exact location of their physical union, and he held them up on the sword. He killed them. He held them up in the sky to show everybody what he had done, and the plague ended at that moment, and but not before 24,000 people died in the plague. Now, this week what happens is right away, let's take a look at the verses over here. We see, first of all, we see that Pinchas is rewarded for this act. So Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron HaKohen, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by displaying among them his passion for me, so that I did not wipe out the Israelite people in my passion. Therefore, I grant my pact of peace. So Pinchas is awarded. What's he awarded with? He's awarded with the first Nobel Peace Prize. Actually, I don't want to demean or diminish this Peace Prize by referring to it as the Nobel Peace Prize, because we all know the Nobel Peace Prize is anything but a peace prize. It's a political tool. But here was a real peace prize, and he was awarded the Nobel the first prize, the first peace prize. But it seems a little bit odd, does it not, that his act of violence, after all, what did he do? He killed two human beings. He killed two human beings with a sword. That act of vengeance and passion and fury and violence should be rewarded with a peace prize, a pact of peace. The other question that the commentators point out over here is it's unusual for the Torah to identify somebody by the name of their so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, to go back 3 generations. Why was it necessary over here to identify Pinchas as the son of Eleazar and the grandson of Aaron HaKohen? So the answer to that question is we all know, we've spoken about it many times, what was Aaron's midah? Who was he? What was his greatness? What was his unique quality, his attribute? He was Ohev Shalom, Rodev Shalom. He was the ultimate peacenik. He loved peace. He ran after peace. He pursued peace. So Pinchas, by telling us that Pinchas was the grandson of Aaron, is telling us not only was he his grandson biologically, but he was his grandson ideologically. He followed in Aaron's footsteps, meaning he was the ultimate man of peace. He was not a violent, angry zealot like you might think he was when you read the story about his act of violence. Rather, he was the grandson of Aaron HaKohen who followed in his path. So how can this be a path of peace? He killed 2 people. So there's a big lesson right away, and that is that pacifism is not peace. And sometimes, in fact, pacifism can be the opposite of peace. In 1938, when Germany invaded the Sudetenland, and Neville Chamberlain appeased Adolf Hitler, Yimach Shemo v'Zichro. What was his famous quote at that time when he came back from that meeting with the Chancellor Hitler, and he said, "Peace in our time." Yeah, right, peace in our time. Appeasement, in that case, led to the worst atrocities in human history, World War II. So sometimes peace requires war. Pinchas's act of killing was an act of peace. And the proof is that Hashem rewarded him as a reward for it, the bris shalom, the pact of peace. And that's an important lesson, that pacifism has no place in the face of evil. And sometimes it is necessary to stand up and to stand up with arms and to defend oneself and to defend truth and to defend what is good and what is right. And that is not an act of violence. That is an act of peace. Okay, but interesting is we find out now in our Parsha who these people were. Again, last week it just said an Israelite man consorted with a Midianite woman. But now in our Parsha we find out more. V'shem ish Yisrael amukeh asher huka es hamidjani Zimri ben Salu nasi beis av l'shimoni. We find out that the man was Zimri, the son of Salu, who was the leader of the Shimonite family. Okay, I didn't put the verse in there, but we also find out that the woman, her name was Kazbi bas Tsur. Kazbi, the daughter of Tsur, from the Midianite, she was the Midianite princess. Okay, so question, and this is not my question, this is a question that is asked by the great commentary, the Oht HaChaim, as well as others. Which is it? Are we protecting their identity? I mean, after all, the Torah is broadcasting in our Parsha who these people were, right? We know exactly now who they were. Last week, the Torah seemed to be protecting their identity. They seemed last week to be in the witness protection program. It's just that an Israelite man and a Midianite woman committed this terrible act of immorality in front of Moshe and in front of the Jewish people. Didn't call them out, didn't specify who they were. And now we find out who they were. We see their names. So which is it? So the Oht HaChaim has a very interesting answer. First, let's see how he formulates the question. And the name of the Israelite man, etc., etc. He says, if God was so interested in our knowing the names of the people Pinchas slew, why did the Torah not report this at the time it reported Pinchas's deeds in the last Parsha? If the Torah had mentioned these names at that time, it could have saved us at least half a sentence here. I like the way he says that. In other words, Hashem could have saved a little bit of ink. Hashem doesn't get paid. God doesn't get paid by the word when he writes the Torah. It could have just said over there who it was, and it didn't need to tell us over here. So what are we doing? Are we protecting their identity? Are we not protecting their identity? That is the question of the Oht HaChaim. So what does the Oht HaChaim answer? He says something very interesting. But I think I got mixed up here. 1 second. I lost my note over here. What does he say? He basically says, let's just read the words over here. What the Oht HaChaim says. The Torah explained that Pinchas. Okay, so let me give you the answer off the notes. So basically, the idea is that the Torah generally tries to hide and sees no need to identify or call out or embarrass sinners. But what's the purpose? What's the point of embarrassing a sinner? Okay, there's no reason to do that whatsoever. So God generally tries to protect the identity of the sinner. For example, we know the wood chopper, right? The Mekoshesh Eitzim. The Torah doesn't tell us who that wood chopper was. Why? Because it was a sin, and it wasn't necessary for us to know who it was. In fact, when the Talmud reveals the identity of who the wood chopper was, Rabbi Akiva identifies who the wood chopper was. Who was the wood chopper? The wood chopper was Tzalafchad, who we'll learn about a little bit later in this parsha. The Talmud says, whoa, Rabbi Akiva, what are you doing? The Torah specifically left out his name. Why are you mentioning who he was? It's not appropriate to call him out. The whole world doesn't know who he was. So there's no reason to identify the name of this Midianite woman and Israelite man unnecessarily. So last week at the end of the Parsha, the focus was on this terrible sin, this terrible act of immorality, public desecration of God's name. There was no need to call out the names of these particular sinners. But this week, the focus is not on the act already. That's already old news. The focus is on Pinchas's act of bravery. And in order to understand the magnitude of Pinchas's act of bravery, in order to amplify and clarify for us how great this act was, we need to know who they were. They weren't nobodies. They weren't commoners. They weren't simple people. These were hugely important individuals. So let's see what the Oht HaChaim says. The Torah explained that Pinchas had taken very great personal risks, as the two victims involved were very highly placed individuals. When the persons for whose sake one displays just jealousy on behalf of God are aristocrats, highly placed, this makes the act of sanctifying God's name even more meritorious. Had the individuals in question been ordinary people, Pinchas could not have accomplished as much through his display of jealousy on behalf of God as the personal danger to which he exposed himself at the hands of the victims' surviving relatives would have been much less. So where we're focusing on Pinchas's act, his incredible mesirus nefesh, his sacrifice, his risk that he took in order to kill these people, we have to know these weren't just nobodies. This was a nasi. This was a leader, a tribal leader of one of the tribes. And nonetheless, when he saw this public desecration of Hashem's name, he knew that he had to act and do something about it as soon as possible. Okay, well, let's just talk about Zimri for a minute. Zimri, this guy's Zimri. It's very interesting. What was he thinking? Zimri was the leader of the Shimonite tribe. Was he just a lowlife? Was he just, following his base sensual desires? It doesn't make sense because the Nesiim generally were very high elevated people, leaders of the Jewish people who were not just randomly chosen, but were chosen because of their elevated spiritual and intellectual status. And B, if that's all he was trying to do was just to gratify himself and his physical drives, why did he have to make an obvious, blatant public display? It would have been enough for him just to do what he wanted to do privately. So there must have been some ideological or religious motivation behind what he was doing. So Rabbi Uziel Malevsky, who was the former chief rabbi of Mexico, and then ultimately came to Yerushalayim. And he was a teacher, a great, great teacher at Or Sameach. He unfortunately passed away very young, but he gave many, many shiurim at Or Sameach, and they're all recorded. And they're written in a book, and it was some wonderful, wonderful insights that he had, and he was a great teacher. He explained something very interesting, which I never knew until I looked into it this week. So going all the way back to the beginning of the book of Numbers, in the first chapter of Numbers, Bamidbar, we find out who all of the Nisim, all the leaders of all the tribes were. And it says over here, Lishimon, to the tribe of Shimon. Who was the tribal leader? Not Zimri, like we read over here, but Shelumiel ben Tzuri Shaddai. Shelumiel, the son of Tzuri Shaddai. His name was Shelumiel. Okay, but we find out also a few verses later, it says, Eile Keruei Ha'eda. These are the elected of the assembly. But if you look carefully in the Hebrew, there's two words. One is in parentheses, one is in brackets. The one in the parentheses is the way it is written in the Torah. The way it is in brackets is the way we read it. We read it Keruei Ha'eda, the elected of the assembly, but it's not written like that. The vav is shortened into a yud. It's not a full, the letter vav is not complete there. It's a shortened version of the letter vav, which is a yud. And the commentaries explain over here, the Balaturim explains the reason why this vav is not full length vav over here. It's a shortened vav. Does everyone see what I'm talking about? Let me see if I can show you over here. Over here, this vav, this yud, that's how it's written, but it's pronounced like it's a vav. Okay, so instead of being written correctly in the Torah, it's written in a shortened version in the Torah. So why is that? So the Balaturim explains that of the 12 leaders, of the 12 tribal leaders, one from each tribe, there was one that was slightly lacking, in his righteousness, that was not as righteous or as holy as the rest of them. Who was that? That was Shelumiel. Let's go back. Shelumiel ben Tzuri Shaddai. Shelumiel, the son of Tzuri Shaddai, from the tribe of Shimon. And his name, Shelumiel, comes from the word shalem. What was his philosophy? What did he believe in? What was his approach to life? So this is very interesting. Rabbi Milevsky explains that his philosophy was of shalem, wholeness, oneness, completeness. But he extended it too far, to the point where he believed that there was equality of all people, which of course we also believe, and we don't have any problem with that, but that there should be no differences among people. There should be nothing that distinguishes one people from another, either nationally or religiously. There should be no religious distinction. There shouldn't be many religions, right? Imagine no religion. These were the first John Lennon, right? He was the precursor to this idea of no religion, no nationality. Everybody is the same. Wholeness, oneness that extends universal lack of distinction and differentiation. So that was his philosophy. And then when he saw these Midianite women coming in to the camp, and the Moabite women coming in, he saw an opportunity. He said, "This is a great opportunity for me to publicly display my philosophy. It's not us and them. We're no different than them. They're no different than us. There's no such thing as Moabite nation, Israelite nation, Midianite nation. We're all just human beings, citizens of the universe. There's no differences between people and religion. So in order to do away with all religion and all nationality and all distinctions among men, he brought this Midianite woman into the camp and to have relations with her publicly to show his philosophy." Who was this Shelumiel? Well, we find out later that he's called Zimri. His name Shelumiel gets changed to Zimri. Why? Zimri comes from the word zemer, which means to cut off. He cut himself off from the rest of the community, and his attempt and what he did led to, had Pinchas not done his great act of bravery, would have led to the Jewish people being completely cut off from Hashem because of the plague that resulted in his act of immorality. So that is who Zimri was. He was Shelumiel ben Suri Shaddai. Okay, next thing we find out is that there is a census. A census, the Jewish people are counted. Now, there are two censuses in the book of Numbers. That's why this book is called the Book of Numbers, by the way. The first one was in the beginning of the Parshas Bamidbar, in the first Parsha of this book. And there, the Jewish people are counted. But there's a difference. That was the generation of the Jewish people that left Mitzrayim, the first census. This second census, 40 years later, that entire group of people from the first census no longer is alive. This is a new census, the new generation of the nation of the people that are about to enter into the land of Israel. The new generation, the old generation has died off. Now, the Oht HaChaim has a very interesting, couple of just quick things about this census. One thing is that the Oht HaChaim has an interesting observation. He points out that when you look at the census, and you can look at the numbers, one of the very smallest, the census goes according to tribes, families, tribes. So one of the smallest tribes in number is Benjamin. Benjamin is relatively small. He's got 45,000 Benjaminites. He is the fourth smallest group, this fourth smallest tribe in the census. One of the largest tribes is the tribe of Dan, which has 64,400. That's the second largest. Now, why is that interesting? It's striking, points out the Oht HaChaim, because if you go all the way back to the book of Genesis and you look at the tribe of Benjamin, Benjamin himself had 10 sons. He had more sons than any of Jacob's other sons. He had 10 of his own children, 10 sons. And Dan, the tribe of Dan, how many did Dan have? Dan had one son, and that one son, by the way, had also happened to have special needs. He was deaf and could not speak. Okay? So the Oht HaChaim says, imagine the scene sitting around Jacob's table. He's got all of his sons there, and his sons have all of their children there. And Nebuch, look at this poor son, Jacob's son Dan, poor guy. He's only got one kid. He's only got one child. That one child is deaf and does not have the ability to speak. That presumably he's going to be the weak link in the building of the tribes of Israel. And then you have Benjamin, 10 sons. He's going to be obviously the mightiest tribe of all. What happens? In the end of the day, when we see the final census, we find out it's the exact opposite. Benjamin happens to be one of the very, very smallest tribes in population. And Dan happens to be one of the largest. So the Oht HaChaim says it's an amazing lesson. Life has a way of not following predicted patterns and scripts. We think things are going to turn out a certain way. We think Benjamin's going to be the mightiest of all the tribes and Dan's going to be the weakest. Well, just the opposite happens. As time goes on, life takes unexpected turns and interesting turns, and you never ever know. You never really know where things are going to go. So never give up hope, never despair. We see things from a very limited perspective. If we could see the big picture and the whole picture, we would sometimes understand that which seems to be right now very tragic can actually end up being just the opposite. Interesting insight from the Oht HaChaim. One more thing I want to point out, which is just sort of a cool thing. One of the tribes that we talk about in the census is Yisachar. Here, Yisachar. Now, has anyone heard of the name? Let's see, nod your head, yes or no. Has anyone heard of the name Yisachar before? Does anyone know a Yisachar? You ever heard of Rabbi Frand? Yisachar Frand, right? You ever heard of Rabbi Techtel, Yisachar Dov Techtel? So that's not a very common name, but it's not a totally uncommon name, Yisachar. Okay, but if you look at the name, that's not how it's really written. Because if you look at the name, I'll show you. With my new tool that I discovered over here. Here's the name, Yisachar. There's actually, the real way of pronouncing this name is Yisoschar. There's two sins over there. It's not Yisachar, it's Yisoschar. So why do we call him Yisachar? That's the question. And the truth is, when you're reading the Torah, there's a very interesting custom for the Torah reader that every time this individual is mentioned, until Parshas Pinchas, there is a minhag, a custom to read that name Yisachar, and from here, Parshas Pinchas and on, there is a custom for the reader to read it as Yisachar without the extra sin. Why is that? Okay, good question. So we see over here that Yisachar has a son, and one of his sons' names is Yashuv. See this here, Yashuv. I'll point it out. Yashuv over here, right? Or in English, it's Yashuv. Okay, but that's a little bit weird because when we go all the way back to the book of Genesis, when we first learned about this man, we find out that his name is actually not Yashuv, but Yov. Yisachar's son is named Yov. And later on, he's called Yashuv. So what happened? So there's a medrash that says that Yisachar named his son Yov. He later found out that Yov was the name of an idol. So he said, oh my gosh, I've named my son the name of an idol. That's not going to go well on his shidduch resume. He's going to have a hard time getting into yeshiva with a name like that. So what did he do? He changed his name from Yov to Yashuv. So if you change the name of Yov to Yashuv, what do? You add one letter. What's the letter that you add? You add the letter Shin. So he added a Shin to this guy's name, to his son's name. Instead of being Yov, he named it Yashuv. He added one letter. But where did he get that letter from? He's not God. He can't just create a letter in the Torah. So where did he get it from? He got it from his own name. He took one of his own shins and gave it to his son, Yov, and made Yov Yashuv. And that's why from this point on in the Torah, the custom is to not read his name any longer as Yisachar, but now to read it as Yisachar with one shin. Okay, I don't know how many of you actually followed what I just said. If you did, that's awesome. If you didn't, don't worry about it. Let's move on. Okay. Now, what happens next? The next thing that happens is really strange. Shem says to Moshe, I want you to go up on the top of the mountain, Har Avarim, look at the mountain, and view that land, the land of Israel. Look across the whole land, see how beautiful it is, see how fantastic, magnificent it is, the land that I've given to the Israelite people. And then I want you to see it, and then come down, and then you're going to die. And you're not going to lead the Jewish people into the land. It's like, like my kids used to do, na kush kush, yeah, like, Moshe, look how beautiful this land is. Na kush kush, you're not going to see it. What is going on over here? What's Hashem doing? Why is he playing na kush kush with Moshe? Why is he showing Moshe the land if Moshe's not ever going to get, that's his biggest dream in life, is to go into the land, to lead the people into the land. So what are you doing by making him jealous, by showing it to him? Okay, he can't go in, he hit the rock, whatever, he sent the spies. But why are you rubbing it in by showing him the land before he dies? That's a famous question. Everybody asks that question. So a very interesting answer that I saw is that we know that there are seven, what are called the seven shepherds of Israel, the seven great leaders of the Jewish people: Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, David, and Yosef. Okay, the seven great shepherds. These are also the Ushpizin and Sukkot, the seven guests, the seven holy guests that visit: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moshe, Aaron, King David, David Melech, right, and Joseph. And each one of those seven leaders corresponds to one of the seven of the top spheros of the different attributes of Hashem. So, for example, Abraham is Chesed, Yitzchak is Gevurah, Yaakov is Tiferes. What is Moshe? What's Moshe's Midah? Which Midah in the spheros, in the Kabbalistic arrangement of Hashem's attributes, does Moshe correspond with? Netzach. What is netzach? What does netzach mean? Netzach means endurance. Netzach means eternality. Netzach means forever. Anything that Moshe built, anything that Moshe was involved in is nitzchi. It's eternal. Moshe gave us the Torah. The Torah is eternal. It doesn't change. Not a single letter will ever change in the Torah. And there's not a single letter in the Torah that's not as relevant today as it was on the day that Moshe received the Torah, because it's nitzchi, it's eternal. And that's because Moshe received the Torah. Moshe is the one who built Am Yisrael. He led the nation out of Egypt and created Am Yisrael, the Jewish people. The Jewish people are nitzchi, they're eternal. They always will be, they always were, and they always will be. They will always continue to exist. Why? Because Moshe is the one who initiated and built that nation of Am Yisrael. So everything that Moshe builds is forever, it's eternal. Had Moshe gone into Eretz Yisrael, had Moshe led the Jewish people into the land of Israel, they never would have left. They never could have left, because the Jewish people's presence in the land of Israel would have been nitzchi, it would have been eternal, it would have been forever, it would have endured forever. But that was not the divine plan. That was not Hashem's plan. Hashem's plan involved a journey of exile, a journey of many exiles that would take the Jewish people around the world for thousands of years. And that is the reason why, that's the real reason, not because of the rock and not because of the spies. The real reason why Moshe couldn't lead the Jewish people into the land of Israel is because had Moshe done that, and had he built the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, that would have been eternal. The Jewish people never would have been able to leave. The temple never would have been destroyed. And that was not the divine plan. Okay? So then why send him up the mountain to take a look at this beautiful land that he yearns for and longs for if he's not going to be able to go in? And the answer is because Hashem wanted to maximize Moshe's longing and yearning to be in the land of Israel. Because what did he want? He wanted the longing and the yearning to enter the land of Israel, into the land of Israel, to be eternal, to be forever, to endure forever. So that in the heart and mind of every Jew, there would be an eternal longing, that longing and yearning to go into the land of Israel would be forever a part of the emotional and spiritual makeup of the Jewish people. So Hashem sent Moshe up the mountain to look over and see the land, and to increase his yearning for the land by seeing it, and to increase his desire for the land by seeing it. And that desire and yearning and longing would be eternal, because it was Moshe's desire and longing and yearning. And that would become an eternal part of the Jewish people. And that is what the secret of what kept the Jewish people for 2,000 years in exile, all across the world for thousands of years, generation after generation. How is it possible that the Jewish people kept a dream for 2,000 years to return to the land of Israel? The answer is because Moshe had that yearning. And anything that Moshe experienced is eternal. That's a big, big part of why the Jewish people survived for 2,000 years in Gullus, in exile, because that was Moshe's deepest yearning. Okay. The next thing we find out about is Moshe's desire. Moshe approaches Hashem and says, hey, I get it. I'm not going in. I'm not leading the Jewish people. We need a successor. There needs to be a succession plan. If I'm not going to be the leader that's going to bring these people to the finish line, you have got to find somebody that's going to do it. Because Moshe, he was the leader on the highest level. The highest level of leader is somebody who sees the cause as greater than himself. He's more concerned for the continuity of the cause than he is for his own legacy. So for Moshe, what he cared about the most was the Jewish people entering into the land of Israel. That was the cause. So if I'm not going to be the person to do it, you got to find Rabbi Gadi or somebody else who can do it. Okay, just kidding. But that was the message that Moshe was telling Hashem when he said, we need to find someone to take over this job, and somebody has to lead the Jewish people in. So what did he say? He said, what is Moshe looking for in a leader? He's looking for somebody who will go out before them and come in before them. Somebody who's going to lead the Jewish people. What does it mean to go out before them? He's a true leader. He's going to be willing to sacrifice for the people that he leads. And that's who Joshua was. Joshua was appointed because his willingness to sacrifice for the Jewish people. And that was a big part of what Joshua's role was, which is something we can talk about at another point in time. Now, the last thing in this whole Parsha is the holiday and festival offerings. There were special offerings that were brought, additional offerings, musaf offerings, additional offerings that were brought on the holidays and the festivals. And the Torah goes through and lists them all, starting with Shabbos. It goes to Rosh Chodesh, Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeres. But before it goes through all of those additional offerings, it first says this verse over here. It talks about what's called the Korban Tamid, the daily offering, not the additional offering. The additional offerings are going to be listed are in addition to the daily offering. The daily offering was every day. As a keves echad ta'aseh v'boker, v'es a keves hasheni ta'aseh bein ha'arbaim. You shall offer one lamb in the morning, and another lamb you shall offer at twilight. Every single day, twice a day, every single day of the year, without exception, these two offerings were brought. In fact, we just fasted on Sunday, the 17th of Tammuz. There are 5 reasons why we fast on that day. But one of the reasons was because that was during the siege, the Babylonian siege, the day that they stopped being able to bring the daily offering was the 17th of Tammuz. So there's something about this daily offering that is incredibly important. Now, there's an interesting medrash. The medrash asks, the question was posed to the great rabbis, what is the most important verse in the Torah? Wow. Or let's say like this, what verse in the Torah most highlights or most encapsulates the banner or the motto of the Jewish people? And there were 3 opinions. I'm going to tell you what the 3 opinions are, and then I'm going to let you vote. We could have done some cool voting technology on Zoom, but I didn't prepare it. Okay, so the first rabbi said, okay, obviously, clearly, the most important verse in the Torah is V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. Okay, I think that's a pretty good answer. Steps up the second rabbi. The second rabbi says, oh, it's a no-brainer. Obviously, the motto, the banner, the Jewish people, the most important verse is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Okay, good answer. I can hear that. The third rabbi gets up and he says, you're all wrong. The most important verse in the Torah, the motto, the banner of the Jewish people is this verse. You shall offer one lamb in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at twilight. Huh? This verse, chapter 28, verse 4 in Numbers, why is that a meaningful, important verse at all, let alone one of the top 3? Okay, now everyone vote. Let's see. Who thinks, you can put it in the chat if you want. Who thinks it should be love your neighbor as yourself? All in favor, say aye. Raise your hand. Okay. Who thinks it should be Shema Yisrael? All in favor, say aye. Who thinks it should be Esa keves echad ta'aseh v'boker v'esa keves hasheni ta'aseh ben arbaim? You should offer one lamb in the morning. Larry. Okay, good. We got one. Okay. Why is that verse so important? Why is that verse so important? Because Judaism, this is a key thing to remember. Judaism is every day, day in and day out. Judaism is constant. Judaism is consistent. Judaism is not something you do when you're in the mood, right? Judaism is something we are. We live it every single day. It's who we are. It doesn't matter whether we're on vacation or we're not on vacation. It doesn't matter whether we're in the mood to do Judaism or to not do Judaism. Judaism is every single day, consistency. It's like marriage, right? Imagine how good your marriage would be. That was facetious. If you say, look, when I'm at home and I'm in town, you're my wife. When I go out on my business vacation, business trip, we're not married. Yeah, good luck. That's a real marriage. It's a terrible marriage. So Judaism has to be every single day. It's at the very, very core, the very essence of who you are. That is symbolized by the Korban Tamid, the daily grind, day in, day out. Even when it's like been there, done that. That is the most important thing to remember Judaism. Now, it dawned on me, it may have dawned on you also, that there were three. Remember we said there were three rabbis who had three verses. One was love your neighbor as yourself. One was Shema Yisrael. And the other one was this verse. You shall offer one lamb in the morning and one at night. Thought about that and I realized that it fits perfectly into our threesome, into our triplet key. Love your neighbor as yourself. That defines our relationship, the relationship between man and man, interpersonal human relationships. Love your neighbor as yourself defines how you shall relate to other people. So the first rabbi said the most important relationship that we're here for, that we have to focus on, is our relationship with other people. That's why V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha encapsulates that. The next rabbi says, no, Shema Yisrael is the most important verse. Why? Because what is Shema Yisrael? That's my relationship between man to God. Ultimately, there's one God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. That's the most important thing, man to God. And the third rabbi, and this is the one they approved and voted on, is the most important verse is this verse. Every single day, be consistent. Every single day. You have to every single day, you have to offer the korban every single day without exception. Why? Because man to man, man to self is the most important relationship. Because I have a Yetzer Hara, and my Yetzer Hara is going to attempt at every moment to overcome me, to overtake me. And what do we say? Who is a mighty person according to Pirkei Avot? Ezehu Gibor, who is the mighty person? Hakovesh es Yitzro. Now, did anyone notice? Look at this word, Hakovesh. What are the letters of this word? What's the root? Chaf, base, shin, right? Let's go back. What is the word? Go back to the word for sheep that I have to bring every single day. What is the shorish? What is the root? Chaf, base, shin. It's the same word. The same word in Hebrew for lamb over here is the same verse in Hebrew for kovesh, to conquer, to overcome my Yetzer Hara. So what's the message? The message is every single day, twice a day, I have to conquer my Yetzer Hara. When? Once in the morning, when I leave my house and I go out to face my day and I go to work and I go to face the challenges of work. What do I have to do? I have to kovesh my Yetzer Hara. I have to conquer my Yetzer Hara. My Yetzer Hara, that's going to tempt me to do all kinds of things in work that may not be kosher, that may not be legitimate, or to speak lashon hara in the workplace, or whatever it's going to be. And then again, when I come home at night, before I enter into my house, to keep my calm, to be there in the right way for my family, what do I have to do? I have to be kovesh as Yitzhak. I have to subdue and overcome my Yetzer Hara once in the morning and once at night. So man to self is the most important area. That's the one that we can control the most, and that's the one that we have to focus on. Okay, that is the daily korban. Now, what I want to do, we have about 10 minutes left, is I want to go back, if we can, to the daughters of Tzalafchad. Take a few minutes and just try to unpack that story just a little bit more. Okay. So the basic outline of that story, there's really two parts of the story. One part here and one part at the end of the book of Numbers. And next week, maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit more. Let's just focus on the first part. The first part over here, there's a man named Tzalafchad. Tzalafchad, strange name, Tzalafchad. We'll talk about that name in a minute. And he was from the tribe of Menashe, and he was a descendant of Joseph's, and he had 5 daughters. Now, the laws of inheritance at that time were as such. The Torah lays out the law, which is that when a man dies, his land and his property and his possessions will go to his sons. If he has no sons, it'll go to his brothers. If he has no brothers, it'll go to his uncles. That's what the Torah had originally laid out to be the laws of inheritance. Then this man, Tzalafchad, dies. Tzalafchad had no sons. He only had daughters. Comes along these 5 daughters, and they say, our father died. Why should their name be diminished? Why should his name be diminished? Why should his name be lost to our clan just because he had no son? Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen. In other words, they were asking for or demanding the land. Now, there are a whole bunch of different theories and discussions, and ranging from modern to ancient, about what was motivating these women. For example, if you read it in some of the more modern, contemporary, less traditional, if you will, Torah commentators, they will use this story as a biblical validation of the idea or the notion of feminism, right? They will say, look, there were these 5 women, they were the original feminists. And these 5 women will be like biblical spokeswomen for the feminist movement. Is that true? Is that not true? Is that really what this was all about? I'm not saying that the Torah is not in support of feminism, but I don't think that's what this particular story was about. Why? Because they're not claiming they should get land if there were sons. They're only saying, yeah, okay, if there's sons, the sons should get the land. If there are no sons, it should go to us. Okay, so this doesn't seem to be a movement towards feminism, because if it was feminism, it would be, hey, equality. Why do the sons get the land? When all the children, the daughters should get the land too. That's not what they're saying. They're saying, okay, if there are no sons, the women should get the land, not the uncles or not the brothers. Also, another possibility was that this was just a selfishly motivated land grab. These women just wanted land. This was just financially motivated. But the difficulty with that is that, first of all, these women are considered 5 righteous women. So if they were righteous women, then why would it just be they were in it for the money? And also, Moshe would have contested them. He would have protested. And Hashem would not have agreed. And an entire Parsha in the Torah is written now about what happens when there are daughters. The daughters get the land. That all came about in their merit. So obviously, these were very, very righteous women. So what was motivating them? What was the interest that they had? So I want to share one possible thought. We spoke about this once a number of years ago, and an interesting insight that I had at the time. So let's take a careful look at their words. What did they say? Lama yigara shem avinu mitoch mishpachto. Why should our father's name be lost in his family? What does it mean that a name should be lost? So there's a great rabbi teacher, contemporary teacher, who lives in Israel. His name is Rabbi Elchanan Samet. He's a teacher. He teaches at the Gush Etzion Shiva, which some of us have visited together, where Rabbi Taragin teaches. And he explains a little bit. He says, let me read to you what he says, because it's very telling. He says, the name of a man is a central concept in the world of Tanakh. What does it mean? What is a name? What is that concept? We don't want his name to be lost. That which continues a man's existence within the human context after his death. That's what a name is. That's which gives a person continuity, because everybody lives and everybody dies. But a name is that which gives a person continuity in the human context after his death. Man's physical existence ceases with his death, but his shame, his name, his metaphorical essence continues to exist within our world in a certain sense. A man has an existential need to anchor his existence within eternity, right? We could all relate to that. One of the scariest thoughts that a person can have is that when I leave this world, it's as if I never lived. It's as if I was like a passing shade. I never existed. I was never here. I didn't make a difference. And that's why people do so many things. They build towers and name their towers after them. They try to make contributions in whatever way possible, because there's an existential fear that people have to leave this world without any continuity after they leave this world. A man who leaves the world without any continuity, without having left a mark on anything that stays after him, suffers a grievous loss. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to leave this world without having left a mark, made an imprint. His name and memory disappear, and he is cut off for all eternity. The value of his short life is negated, and he's like dust blowing in the wind. Okay? That's a fear that everybody has. Nobody wants to be like that passing shade. In fact, we say it in the high holiday prayers. We say this in Rosh Hashanah, we say it in Yom Kippur, it's in the Unisana Tokef prayer. We say, man, his beginning is from dust and ends in dust. And then listen to this. He is like a potsherd that is breakable, like grass that withers, like a flower that fades, like a shadow that passes, like a cloud that vanishes, like the wind that blows, like the dust that flies, like a fleeting dream. But you are the King, the Almighty, the living and everlasting God. Okay? And in Hebrew, by the way, it's very interesting. These are the examples. And the one I highlighted is kitsail over. Like tsail is a shade, a shadow. Over is passing. Kitsail over, like a passing shadow. Like a passing shadow. We all have a fear of being a passing shadow. Okay? You know who else had a fear of being a passing shadow? It's not just us. Everybody had it. But you know who else had it in a real way? The daughters of Tzalafchad. They were afraid that if their father died and they did not inherit the land, the daughters did not inherit the land, then there'd be no way to perpetuate his name. There'd be no way to perpetuate his mark on the world. In the times of the Tanakh, the way a person left a mark on this world was to have a piece of land and to settle in that land and to build an ancestral land and to create a memorial to your family and to your tribe, right? This was if Tzlafchad leaves this land and it doesn't go to us, his name will be lost. It'll be a kitsail over, a passing shade, right? The daughters are trying to perpetuate their father's memory, to memorialize him through the land remaining as a part of the family heritage. It was a positive motivation. That's what was motivating them. They didn't want his name to disappear. And then I realized when I was thinking about this a few years ago, when we prepared this, that I should have written it up, but the name Tzalafchad is combined, a composite of two words. What are the two words? Tsail, like we just said. What does tsail mean? A shadow, a passing shadow. And pachad. What is pachad? Pachad is fear. The daughters of Tzalafchad had a tsail pachad. They had the fear, they lived with a fear of their father being a passing shadow, that he would come and go and not leave a mark and not leave an impression in this world. So what did he do? What did they do? They demanded that the land go to them so that they could continue to memorialize their father through this piece of land and pass it down from generation to generation. And that would be the idea of being expressed here. Yes, and Bob pointed out that's the reason why we name children after a loved one, so that name could be perpetuated. That's why we have things like Yibum. That's why we name children after those who have passed away. We all live with this. What's being expressed over here, what these daughters are expressing, is something that we all share. We all share a tzalafchad. We all share a tseil pachad, a fear, a deep, genuine fear of being kitsail over, like being a passing shadow. Nobody wants to leave this world without having left some kind of imprint, left some kind of meaningful mark in the world. And that's what these daughters were motivated by. They weren't motivated by grabbing land. They weren't motivated by creating a feminist movement. They were motivated by creating some kind of continued memorial or monument to their father and what he created. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with everybody tonight. I'm going to